want to talk about good storytelling today, namely the storytelling in the Amazing Digital Circus. It's an animated series that currently has a lot of folks hooked on the mystery and the character drama, myself included. And with that anticipation comes a lot of wild speculation and predictions online. And for that, I wanted to help by using the show as an example of how to really analyze a story and look for storytelling techniques to try and figure those mysteries out. So before you're chased away by the runtime or, well, me, I promise you, stick around and I think you'll find some new ways to obsess over this or any other show. And at the same time, learn some new things about the Amazing Digital Circus. Things like how Ragatha's fake nice persona was tipped off in episode 1, how Pomni's first real choice might set the tone for the ending, and how the curse of the violent psychopath butcher was Caine trying to be helpful actually. We've got all that and much more. Let's talk about storytelling in the Amazing Digital Circus. But wait, where are my manners? Hi, I'm Cheshi. If you don't know me, I wear a purple carpet and make videos about media and fandom sometimes. I got into the Amazing Digital Circus after it kind of hit a bit of unprocessed trauma, but that's a full story for another time. Suffice to say, I was hooked. And for the fans of the Amazing Digital Circus kind of extended creator universe, you might have mental scars from my 5 seconds of dancing in Examinations video Happy Place. And as a reminder, if you like what I'm talking about, please comment, like, and subscribe. And if you hate me, do the same. Your hate feeds the algorithm. If you don't know the Amazing Digital Circus, it's a 9-part animated miniseries on YouTube. It's up to episode 6 and has nearly 1 billion views so far. And it's got a serious chunk of people out there caught up in it. It's a bit of dark comedy, psychological horror, character drama, and mystery all rolled up in the livery of a kid's show. Seriously, if you haven't watched the show, give it a shot. By the end of episode 2, you should have a good idea if this is your thing or not. Okay, now for the 60-second summary. Promise. The story centers on people trapped in a virtual world. Inspired by Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. The main character, Pomni, drops in at the very beginning to find her real name gone and a virtual world she cannot escape. She meets other characters there, all subject to the whims and whimsy of Caine, an AI ruler of the circus. Now this may look all cartoony and silly, but I assure you, it's all deep and dark and twisted in the way that no child could comprehend. Okay, not really. There's definitely plenty to be enjoyed by adults here, but this is the sort of show that a 10 to 18-year-old me would have reworked their entire personality around. And for much of the online fanbase, that appears to have happened. And if you don't know me or the Amazing Digital Circus, then I guess your finding me is destiny, and your fate is sealed. Moving on. Given the coveted demographic for the show, intentional or not, and the massive anticipation for the next episode, this has been a breeding ground for the YouTube content mill and 20 Secrets of the Amazing Digital Circus. This super twisted series is too mature for you. Like and subscribe. Reaction videos where I just say, whoa, and this is so cool, and have nothing of substance to add. There's a lot of grifters out there. And frankly, I want in. Unfortunately, I have a conscience. So instead, I'm actually going to share some insight with you and talk about the Amazing Digital Circus and what it's doing on a storytelling level that makes it compelling, and how we may be able to predict where some of this is going given the story. And if your predictions are right, you can earn massive internet clout for being right. And if you're wrong, you also get to make your I was wrong video and get even more engagement. So, up front, no ChatGPT here. No mining other videos for content, no summarizing everyone's Reddit posts. I will cite when I did get something from elsewhere or where, there's a general sentiment I've seen, but I haven't really been trying to read that. This is just real talk on themes, metaphor, symbolism, and how we can unpack. Whoa there. I see you glancing at your recommended videos for something else to watch. No, really, I see you. The cameras are operational. But I promise you, your English teacher did you dirty by making you dissect boring books and finding 3 instances of metaphor and 2 similes per chapter. That's just digging through a dusty old book you never cared about with tweezers and a scalpel. But when it's something fun, it's the joy of taking a chainsaw to something you truly love and finding out what's inside. Okay, don't do that literally. That's a metaphor. Or simile. I can never remember which is which. Seriously, when you're obsessing over a show, isn't it exciting to find something in the actual text that sends you on a new path? Maybe even something nobody else has spotted before? And to bring this back to the Amazing Digital Circus, I'm excited to talk about this because it's actually a really good example of well-structured storytelling. It's just hidden under the lolrandom humor and absurdity. Stick with me, and if you dare to withstand the cringe of giving an essay on the Amazing Digital Circus to your English teacher, you might not fail. Maybe. Results not guaranteed, void in France. So, how do we do this? There's 3 parts we're going to walk you through with Circus here. 1. Lovingly tearing your hyperfixation into pieces. 2. Understanding how good stories are structured. 3. Trying to connect the dots between parts 1 and 2. But wait, there's more. If you learn this today, not only can you break down shows you like, you can apply this to stories you might want to make yourself. Seamlessly introduce characters to your audience. Have plot developments that don't seem forced. Give literary heft to your most depraved fanfiction. That Pomni/Pennywise story you've been dreaming of now can have that little extra something that makes it over the top. Stick around and I'll share with you some of the possible secrets yet to be uncovered, the most consequential relationship, and maybe at least one more film reference that nobody has found yet. Or I'm hallucinating. But before we begin, I'm going to lead with something a little more controversial. Hear me out. Look, I see it all the time online. Someone zoomed on a background shot and decided the letters on the blocks are a secret code, or the painting on the wall, or counting the number of trees, like it's all some secret code to us. You know, somehow it's funny because we've grown up from, the curtains were blue because they were blue, end of explanation. But also, if you look at the pixels in this image, clearly it shows everything. While English class ruined our ability to tear apart text, I think the online content mill is the culprit here. I'm going to guess that those videos will have orders of magnitude more eyeballs than this ever will, because it's going to take too long for me to get to the explanation. So pixel peeping becomes that one weird trick to figure everything out. So I'm going to make the bold suggestion that almost all of this is just background, for a few reasons. My first one is purely practical. Gooseworks is handing animation over to Glitch Productions. Unless she's got some crazy notes for the animators, she's letting them do their jobs and making great backgrounds for the show. Animators are artists themselves, and they are going to give those scenes character. The second one is, well, we don't need to. Like, this isn't an ARG where we've got 5 minutes of badly acted YouTube, the glitch filter, and a coded text string. This is a fully scripted show with hours of dialogue and action. If Gooseworks wants to put information in there, she's got ample opportunity to do it in the text. The last one is kind of a story reason. The pilot introduced us to the characters and a bit of a mystery, but to Gooseworks' credit, it's been more or less a character story ever since then, with the background mystery quietly creeping in. And that's important because we've only got 9 episodes to get an ending. But more importantly, we have to care about the people before we get there. And don't get me wrong, we've got a few mysteries already set up, but those dominoes haven't started falling. Nobody's brought up the exit since the pilot, or the void even. Heck, nobody's even talked about trying to escape. We were handed our little mystery box in the pilot, exits, the void, abstraction in the office. But after that, it's been character first. And that's important. Why? So when your favorite character turns into a horrible beast and gets sent to the cellar, you are going to hurt for days. So what are we going to look at today? 3 things. 1. What the characters say. 2. What the characters do. 3. What the cameras choose to reveal. Choose is the key word here. When a camera fills the frame with something, consider it intentional. When a camera or character action moves to reveal something, consider it intentional. When it's just sitting there kind of untouched, I'm going to say it's probably not interesting. And hey, maybe I'm wrong and we can compare results after it's all over. So if you're like me and bad at pulling apart stories, how do you get better at it? I'm glad you asked. For only a few minutes of your time, I promise you skills untold. Analyze stories, win arguments online, be the guy at the party that nobody wants to talk to with your binder full of notes on your hyperfocus show. All this can be yours for $0 and a few minutes of your time. All right, enough talk. Let's break out the saw and see how many layers this puppy has. Let me tell you a true story about one of my now sadly departed English teachers. We'll call him Mr. A. He looked like he was already 5 years past retirement at any moment. And boy did he act it. Soft-spoken, smart, but he had 0 fucks to give. And he did not suffer fools. The majority of my high school's English department were literal Vietnam War draft dodgers. They had had a lot of fun in the 1970s. And with those guys, you could often get away with stuff like, green eggs and ham is symbolic of the reluctance to acknowledge the inevitability of life and death, where the green eggs symbolize birth, and the ham being cured and smoked, therefore preserved, therefore embalmed, is symbolic of death. Hey, you want to do that for the Amazing Digital Circus? Let's do it. So like Pomni's name resembles the word pomme in French, and that like means apple. And you know, the apple with Adam and Eve and symbolic of the forbidden fruit of knowledge. So she's the forbidden fruit of knowledge for the circus, and everyone becomes aware that they have to rise up against Caine and like escape man. Oh wait, make that a pomegranate. Yeah, pomegranate could be a fruit of wisdom. It's from that region. And that's why Jax is afraid of it, because he's afraid of the knowledge man. He's afraid of the truth. Whoa, that's deep. But Mr. A, no, was having none of that bullshit. He would pause, look up and patiently ask, page, paragraph, sentence, please, before leafing through the book. And if you were bullshitting, you would receive the most eloquent of verbal beatdowns. And in all fairness, if you surprised him with something he'd never noticed before, or you could back up that bullshit, he would be delighted. So picture this: on the second day of class, we arrived having been given a 3-page science fiction story to read and take notes. You know, the usual robots and apocalypse sort. We all thought this was a joke and had like 2 sentences written. Then he began asking questions like, where did this happen? How many people lived in the house? What does this term mean in this context? Who is this sentence referring to? And of course, we had no idea. It was 3 pages. Computers, bright white flash, destruction, the usual. We all thought it was a joke, but in fact, it was a trap. He spent the next hour and 15 minutes of class making us tear apart a 3-page story, sentence by sentence. If there was a term we didn't know, he tossed us a dictionary. If there was a question on where something was happening, we dug for clues. If there was an unturned stone, we turned it over. It was honestly exhausting, but we very quickly learned how to understand how he wanted us to read, and not only find the details, but tie them together. After the class, we were all baffled by this. But all those years later, that moment stuck with me. I'm not going to say I'm actually good at it, but it's a good skill to at least try once in a while. It's amazing how different your second, third, fourth, 5th, 20th careful pass of a story can be. And hey, you're dying for more of the story, and there's only 1 episode every 4 months. By rereading it and finding new things, you're finding new story, aren't you? Join me in the downward spiral of hyperfixation. So, how do we do this for the Amazing Digital Circus? First things first, watch the show. Enjoy the show. Get the vibe for all the characters you want. Draw all the fan art. Write all the fanfic you want. Make all the theories you want. Don't ever think of this as getting in the way of enjoying the show. Think of this as augmentation. But when you're ready, set up your video player and a notepad or doc file, hit play, starting at episode 1, and then get ready to hit pause. Because you're taking notes, and you don't want to miss a thing. This list will be slightly different depending on the genre. Below is a pretty good selection. Pause and take a note whenever 1. Somebody says something you don't understand. You might need to look up a term. That's fine, go do it. Or someone is referring to an event in story, and you need to remind yourself what happened. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, and later on I'll give you an example under my Wild Theory section, because I'll lose you if this is the first example I give. This one's a little too over the top. 2. A character makes a real choice. Does Pomni choose to reach out to Jax and not Ragatha? Write it down. Does a character choose to not get involved in an adventure? Write it down. Characters are a sum of their choices, and how they act with each other or the story says a lot. Like, think about Pomni. What's the first real choice she made in the show? Her name? Not really. When Kaufmo attacked and she initially ran, self-preservation isn't that big of a choice. But after she says to Ragatha she'll get Caine to help and runs off, she's presented with the exit. She has a real choice. Try to leave the circus or stay and get help. Pomni chooses the exit. As the first real choice for a main character to make, I would say that's a pretty important one. We will put a pin in that one. 3. A character demonstrates or exemplifies one of their personality traits. Full credit to the Amazing Digital Circus. This one's easier to spot than you think. Like, for example, When did the online discussion start to vibe that Ragatha was being quote-unquote fake nice? I think episode 4 started that ball rolling in text, but when was the first time and who indicated it? It was Ragatha herself. About 12 minutes into episode 1 even, abstracted Kaufma was attacking Ragatha, and she says, "I know we didn't always get along, like when you called me out for fake laughing at your jokes." And she even offered an excuse that she was having a bad day, which kind of confirmed she was faking it. That's the sort of line that flies under the radar until a good rewatch. Now, I'll admit this is often nothing shocking, but it does reveal how well the writer can establish characters, and it also serves as inspiration for your own work. 4. When a character says something that seems, well, not odd, but cryptic or maybe ominous. Now, sometimes it's just set up for a joke, or a character dropping a reference to a movie from the 70s. But if it feels like a hook for a possible plot point, hang on to it. Like in episode 2, when Caine glitches out over, "If I lose track of who's real and who's an NPC, that might be important. Write it down." Finally, when the camera or characters choose to reveal or focus on something. In books, this would be when something is described. But for visual, the key word here is choose. For the first example of this, there's the computer terminal inside the exit that sticks out. But I think the most direct example in that scene is when the camera tilts up to reveal this logo. That's not a background detail. That's what you would consider a directed and intentional camera movement. So you've got all these points. What do you do next? Well, that is after you question your life choices, wasting a few hours doing this. What do you do next? You look for connections. You look for patterns. This is often the step I see people faltering on. They go online with this, "Hey, when they said this, did they mean something?" instead of trying to tie it to other statements. A one-off random remark is either a fluff, a joke, or if it's connected, starting something. It's only when you combine the pieces that you get somewhere. One way you can do this with your notes is you color code it. So you color code by character or concept and you start to connect the dots. Now these dots might lead nowhere, or they might show a very consistent set of characters and actions or themes. This will be your first indicator if the person writing the story is doing a good job or not. Spoiler alert, talk more later. Since I'm using this to talk about the Amazing Digital Circus, I have good news. But first, let me give an example using the above. The thing you've all been wanting to know about. Who has the feels for whom? Not the exit or abstraction or whether their digital selves are now detached from their physical selves. No, who's got the hot and bubblies for one another? And may I present to you what could be the most consequential relationship between two characters of them all. Drum roll, please. Caine and Zooble. Look, I said consequential, not romantic. And Caine's got God mode. His feelings seem pretty important. Now, don't get me wrong, Zooble doesn't seem to have anything going for Caine, and I don't even think Caine realizes what he's feeling. But there is something very much unique about how Caine interacts with Zooble versus the rest of the gang. And it may be important later. Observe the text from some key moments. Episode 1. Caine promises Zooble an adventure that won't be obtrusive, so Zooble can avoid it. How nice of Caine, even if it doesn't work out. He doesn't promise that for anybody else, does he? Episode 2. Zooble walks away from the adventure and waits until Caine is gone at the end to come back. Nothing big so far, but Zooble seems to want to keep a distance. Episode 3. Zooble bails on the adventure built for them, and then has one-on-one time with Caine, the only one to get this besides the Spudsy's evaluations next episode. Here we get therapy, but also what pops out is the standard, "If you can't remember or realize why I'm mad, I'm even more mad," tropey dialogue that every sitcom romance has. But by the end, Zooble confides again in the dislike of their collection of non-human parts, even after Caine offers up a toy box full of parts, and then Caine eventually opens up about his own insecurities. In this episode, clueless or not, Caine confides in Zooble, and vice versa. Also, Caine draws a bee. Isn't that nice? Okay, episode 4. Caine has a new adventure, The mystery of the violent psychopath butcher. Before we do Spudsies. Oh, Caine, you wacky choice of adventure. Whoa, hold on, back up a second. Caine created an adventure where scary human meat is all over the walls, and boy is it smelly. I want you to think for a second what that relates to. So the adventure after Zooble complained about their non-human body, Caine makes an adventure all about how gross human parts are. That's probably the worst way to make Zooble feel better. Kind of like giving a kid a copy of Old Yeller because you won't give them a puppy. But it seems like an attempt was made. Caine listened to Zooble's insecurities and tried to make them feel better. Badly. It is a small detail, or maybe a hell of a coincidence, but that's an interesting pair of dots to connect, isn't it? Episode 5. Zooble gets to sit out whatever adventure the gang were on in the cold open. They arrive at the end of an adventure. Also, strangely, that bee drawing Caine was drawing in episode 3 comes back with a series of drawings, including one where Caine has a bee sona. Look, I know I don't do background details, but this is being shown with purpose, if only briefly, and if other people want to interpret it, go ahead. I'll also notice Caine foreshadows the softball game when he says home run. Anyway, then when the group is given adventure ideas, Zooble says they didn't hate the last suggestion box adventure, and boom, Caine immediately breaks out the suggestion box again. Also, Zooble appears to be able to add in rules like Jax being a vegan into the vote, and it just happens. Remember, Caine never said that was part of the rules. Zooble just sort of added it, and the system went along with it. When Jax complains about the mind control not being allowed by Caine, but Jax got turned vegan, the camera snaps to Zooble. Again, everyone gets these votes now, but strange this seems to violate the rules when Zooble could do it. Now, Zooble's the only one who tried this out, so it's hard to read too much into it, but just that line saying, hey, Caine can't do that, and the camera panning to Zooble suggests some sort of intent there. Also, Zooble gets to occupy the void with Caine here, but that could be random. Still, it just keeps feeling like Zooble is playing by a slightly different set of rules than the rest of the bunch, right? Also, while only Jax seems to notice the fourth wall, Zooble is the only one in episode 1 commenting on the apparently diegetic opening. Fancy word drop, diegetic. It means what's happening on screen is actually happening. So the gang actually performing the musical number intro makes it diegetic versus a musical number that isn't quote-unquote really happening. Now you too can sound like a YouTuber. End of digression. Episode 6. Zooble says Caine keeps hanging outside their room and singing Daisy Bell when Zooble doesn't answer. You know, the song Pomni and Jack sang later with these lyrics about wanting to marry someone. And then we get Caine's reaction when Zooble says they want the ability to have sex. Just saying. Taking all those points and putting them together does paint a very different picture than any one event on its own. Did I miss anything in the text with Caine and Zooble? What do you think the bee art means? Let me know. Now, maybe it's just because Zooble is negative and Caine wants them all on the adventure, but we don't see anything like this for any of the other characters so far. I think that's a reasonable stab at saying Caine has a relationship to Zooble that's very different than the other PCs, whether Zooble wants it or not, or Caine realizes it or not. Which means for the plot, if there's anyone who can maybe talk Caine off a ledge, it's Zooble. Or conversely, if there's anyone whose rejection will push him off, it's also Zooble. But that remains to be seen. So I've given you a probably obvious example in excruciating detail. But what are we looking for in general here with plotlines? How do we stare into the abyss and learn who exits, who abstracts, and most importantly, which pairing fuck storytelling? Setup, reminder, payoff. Telling a satisfying story requires more than just having the cute characters and lolrandom humor. It needs an audience who has been able to walk with the story and not just be dragged along by the twists and turns. This is kind of an important detail before trying any sort of story talk. Has the story been making quote-unquote sense so far? Because if this was a Simpsons episode where every week we just kind of reset, then you're talking into the void about what to predict. In other words, even with the circus's bizarre world hopping, are things consistent and themes being played out? Like I brought up my ongoing points about Caine and Zooble already. Let's do one that you really want to know about. The ending. Let's make a crappy one for hypothetical purposes. Imagine the digital circus just sort of continues as is, There's more adventures, drama, you're enjoying it, but then at the end of episode 8, Caine, our primary antagonist, just dies. Cash piano dropped on his head. He's no longer running the circus. Then in episode 9, a bad guy defeated in a previous episode, or maybe out of nowhere, just shows up, laughs maniacally, declares they're the real bad guy all along, and now the characters have to suddenly defeat this other bad guy to escape by all punching him in the... Well, as a viewer, you're probably thinking, dude, what the f***? Because it comes out of nowhere, it doesn't follow what the conflict has been all along, and completely undercuts the previous episodes where you learned about Caine and his relation to the characters. That would be totally stupid, and no series would do that, right? Right. The reason why is we expect a pattern to things, cause and effect, setup and payoff, themes. The same goes for all the little things along the way. We are naturally inclined to vibe out a pattern and structure to stories and characters. And even if we don't consciously notice the pattern at the time, it just makes good sense as a good story. In fact, it's even better when we don't notice the setup, because then it feels less forced that way. You plant the story seeds to bloom into plot later. As the late great George Lucas once said, "You may not have noticed it, but your brain did." One of the classics in storytelling is the rule of 3. For jokes, twists, plot points, if you want to make sure the audience is ready for something, you have to set it up, remind them, and then pay it off. More isn't always better, but it does make sure people recognize it. Still, the rule of 3 is the minimum to watch for. Setup, reminder, payoff. And if you're looking to predict things, looking at story threads that have happened twice or more, especially with some separation between them, and aren't resolved is a good way to go. Honestly, most of this incredibly bad prediction effort was just me rewatching the series and jotting down notes to look for setup and a reminder with a missing payoff. We will see how dumb I look at the end. My most accurate prediction will probably be, all of this will be dead wrong. But at least all of this is based on what's in the text. So my primary question remains, has Gooseworks been setting things up? Does there appear to be some sort of a plan? Absolutely yes. Thumbs up. I know there's folks out there glazing this as some super deep thing, but this should be good storytelling 101 for everyone. And sadly, it's become a much rarer thing nowadays. Better yet, the circus has often been showing, then telling. Like even little things have been set up. For a trivial example, in the cold open of episode 4, there's a softball game already going on, just to start the characters doing something. Ragatha is coaching Gangle on how to throw a softball. Episode 5, they end up playing softball because their adventure happens to feature it as a suggestion. Gangle gets a hit and thanks Ragatha. And in episode 6, this drives home that Pomni hurts Ragatha by not being into sports. Like, this could have been clunkily added with dialogue. Ragatha is saying, "I love softball," but Gooseworks used the impromptu softball game in episode 4 to set it up and made it a seamless part of the episode. Or another example. Kinger's lucidity in the dark is hinted at with his pillow fort in episode 1, is shown directly but not explained with a bucket on his head in episode 2, and is fully explained in episode 3. And yes, this could just be Gooseworks knowing her characters and keeping with it, but the developing nature of these does say a lot. I mentioned before, 12 minutes into the show, we already had the first sign of Ragatha's personality, and we didn't even know it yet. Or here, have a gag that played out over 6 episodes. Episode 1, Jax pulls out the key to Kaufmo's room, hints he has keys to everything to mess with Ragatha. We don't know if he does. But in episode 2, he produces the key that unlocked the gate to the Candy Kingdom. Episode 6, after a literal song and dance number at Zooble's door, he does the, "Oh yeah, I have the key." Setup, reminder, payoff. Not only is Gooseworks setting things up, she is, when possible, putting the setups in earlier episodes, which gives them time to breathe. The goose is putting the works in, if you will. And that bodes well for an ending that means something and makes sense. Time will tell, but going back through the shows to look for running themes gives me a lot of hope there. Gooseworks has plenty of runway to crash the plane, but I'm holding out hope the ending is as paid off as the other setups have been. So now we're going to talk about points that seem to be hanging out there, and how they relate to things that are coming. But before we show a few possible dangling setups, a disclaimer and my first wild theory that it's probably wrong. Humans are pattern recognizing machines. We recognize when things match and when things stick out really well. To paraphrase a line from Al Gore, now there's a deep quote, When our evolutionary predecessors gathered on the African savanna a million years ago, and the leaves nearby kind of looked like a lion, the ones who didn't notice are not our ancestors. It's really easy to make out patterns when there's actually nothing there. Sometimes a few points all line up in a single moment, but actually having some repetition makes it more convincing. So here's an example. Gooseworks has sprinkled several movie references in the episodes so far, and either I found the most obscure movie reference of all, or I saw enough dots that I connected them badly. Here's a few the internet has already spotted, for example. There's Halloween 3, Caine references Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, A Boy and His Dog. There's a bunch of others too. This minor one I haven't spotted others talking about might be a reference to THX 1138, an indie film by little-known director George Lucas. Is it plausible? To be fair, it's not even the first THX 1138 license plate reference out there, so maybe. But I present to you either the most backwards movie reference possible, or my brain just connecting dots and drawing something that isn't there. Let me put on my tinfoil hat. Remember how I mentioned noting when a character says something odd, even if just weirdly phrased? Here's one. In episode 5, in one simulation, the main character Pomni is placed in the job of President of the United States of America. Pomni is already kind of a blank slate POV character, and unlike everyone else in the scenario, she's been purposely given no instructions. And as this blank slate in the scene, she reacts by saying, "I am just being here." And that weird turn of phrase, "being here," made me do the quizzical dog head tilt. My pattern recognition was set off. See, there's a famous at the time movie from 1979. Got a couple Oscar nominations. Starred Peter Sellers. About a man who grows up as a blank slate. Never saw the outside world, just lived through television. The whole movie is how this man stumbles into the real world, and his blank slate is either misinterpreted or manipulated as wisdom, and the man rises through the ranks of society quickly. By the end of the story, the plotting is that he's being positioned by others to become the President of the United States. That movie title? Being There. Gooseworks has previously referenced other obscure movies from the 70s. So is it possible? Yes. Am I probably hallucinating the connection? Also yes. Will I feel silly dropping this as an example now that I've covered my butt with this disclaimer? No, but you get the idea. Sometimes a movie reference is just a coincidence. Sometimes an out-of-character statement is just a joke. And sometimes a cigar is just a peanut. So with that unlikely guess out of the way, let's start with some likely ones. Then get increasingly unhinged. Shall we? We are 6 episodes into a 9-episode show. And with what feels like the third act rapidly approaching, I think this next one is a safe bet. Caine cannot handle the idea of players not liking him or his adventures, and it's going to go very badly as this plays out. In the real world, Caine is the clueless middle manager at the office party, wondering why the employees under him in the org chart won't let loose and have fun with him. In the circus, he is an all-powerful and dangerous deity, wondering why his people do not feel they need him. If you've never met one before, a god with an existential crisis is a very bad thing. Episode 1, Caine taken aback by Pomni wanting to leave. Episode 2, glitching on losing track of who's a PC versus NPC, questioning his own abilities. Episode 3, he can't fathom them not liking the adventure, and glitches out the world on, "If I'm bad at the one thing I'm good at." Episode 4, Zooble's quote, "The only thing holding him back is the fact he likes us." Episode 5, he sees them enjoying the stargazing adventure, and questions if they like their adventures more, before quickly switching to another one, because it might show him how they feel. And episode 6, he has the favorite character awards. He thinks he's gonna win, he doesn't win, and then post-credits, he cracks upon seeing no votes. Now, Caine going crazy or evil as a response to this is pretty much a cold take, right? The show is coming to an end one way or another. Also, there hasn't been a real threat to the characters. They can't die. Abstraction seems to be something most of them can stave off, and there's no ticking clock yet. Both of those things need to change for the story to reach some sort of conclusion, and this is pretty well set up. Zooble knows Caine better than the others. Zooble's line, "The only thing holding Caine back is that he likes us," should set the stage for what happens when Caine doesn't like them. So yeah, I think this is a pretty safe prediction, but the drop is definitely coming when Caine loses it over nobody liking the adventures. Jax is also pretty close to the edge, so maybe he blows up on the group, and the group in turn blows up on Caine, who in turn then just blows up. But really, Caine eventually turning on everyone seems to be the main point. At that point, we have a shift in character decisions. If you're going to go 3-act structure, Act 2 started when the crew decided they didn't want to go on Caine's adventures. And Act 3 will be when they choose that they don't want to be in the circus under Caine at all, and they need to get out. All this brings us to the next and related possibility. Pomni and the exit. I'm not going to lie, this is a bit of a wild card to talk much about, but so far it's really been the only MacGuffin we've had in the story. That being said, it hasn't been talked about since episode 1, so it's kind of hiding. Hell, the other characters didn't even see the exit the first time when it appeared in the opening. Nor did they admit to having ever seen it. Only Kaufmo has evidently seen it, and, well, that did not go well. Now, I don't think it's a very hot take to say the exit will come up in some form, but we've already been set up for a key moment with it. Remember the rule of 3? Remember I said earlier how Pomni's first real choice was whether to help Ragatha by finding Caine or taking the exit? She chose the exit. That's the setup. That's the arc. Ragatha mentioned it early in episode 2, with Ragatha's trademark "no hard feelings." That's the reminder. We do not have a payoff for this yet. If I had to make my prediction here, and again, I don't think this is particularly adventurous, Pomni's going to have to make that choice again, only with friends she now cares about, and likely very bad stakes for whoever is left behind. Like, this could set up a really dark ending. Here's a fanfic idea for you. Diddle-doo, diddle-doo, diddle-doo. There's an old joke. At some point in time, all hope is lost. The characters are all trapped in the clutches of Caine gone insane in the membrane, each in cages to be tortured for a digital eternity. But just then, Pomni sees the exit. But she also realizes by leaving she abandons her friends to this horrible fate. Revisiting her choice in episode 1, she's torn, but either by accident, or someone pushes her through, or even just her own choice, she exits, promising to get help. Back in the real world, she tears the visor off her face, her real name back, and she's in the abandoned office. The visor and computer fall apart in her hands, forever useless. She looks over, and the camera she set up for her YouTube is still recording. How is the battery still alive? She's been in there for days. But then she plays the video back, and to her shock, she was only in there for a matter of minutes. And yet, she remembers it all. She remembers them. Every minute she spends in the real world is days of torture for her friends. She wants to rescue them, but she can't even prove they exist. She doesn't even know their real names. How can she prove they're missing with what vague details she knows about them? She's left unsure if she's abandoned her friends or if she was the only player character all along, and she has to carry that for the rest of her life, fruitlessly searching for any evidence of a way back, or if it's real at all. Good news, guys! Pomni got out. Okay, I don't think it would end that way, but Gooseworks does have the chance to traumatize an entire generation if it does. And I am all here for that. So yes, Pomni being tested by the exit, or maybe another character having to choose Pomni or the exit, would be a reasonable bet here. Alright, let's talk about another pair of mysteries. Remember earlier when I said to put a pin on this moment? Where Pomni's in the exit office, the camera tilts up and reveals the logo C&A. Well, you may not have noticed it, but who am I kidding? Everyone noticed the logo. It's been throughout the show. Internet's all talking about it. Again though, this time it was introduced with the motivated camera movement. The internet for a while has been hypothesizing that the C stood for Caine, and the A stood for another character named Among Us. Among Us! Sorry, Abel. It's written on the gun. Full frame, again, motivated camera. So assuming Caine is, well, Caine, who is Abel? Well, it's at this point in time my dearly departed English teacher, Mr. A, not Abel, just A, would materialize long enough to point out the possible literary allusion to the Bible, where Cain killed Abel out of jealousy, and perhaps the names are a foreshadowing of this. Abel may be dead or otherwise gone. Thanks, Mr. A. Or if we want the more modern analog, it'd be Westworld, with the co-founders, one of whom lived, and one who died and was replaced by an AI simulation. You know, like Caine. And of course, there's plenty of speculation that Abel might still be present. Abel might be among us, if you will. Now, the one very oddly specific thing the characters don't remember is their name. So far, none of the characters have indicated any connection to the circus in a pre-digital way. Heck, I'm not even sure how some of them got there. Granted, characters can lie, and I could imagine that would be a fact you might want to hide in this situation. Actually, wouldn't that be a crazy twist? Imagine if all the characters minus Pomni are actually former employees of Caine and Abel stuck in there, and they're all quietly trying to subtly guide her to find a way out, but without her abstracting because, Kaufmo. In this case, it's like because their employee logins don't have the exit coded in. They all went in there and realized they couldn't get out, and now they're waiting for some rando to show up at the office and help. I don't think I would have brought this up at all if it weren't for the fact that none of the characters have a reason to be here except Pomni. Unless this is some weird future where getting stuck in a virtual reality world is akin to being stuck in an elevator, that's the biggest world-building gap that sticks out. I should note that there's nothing in the text that supports this, and that would rely on the what if all the characters lied with no evidence. So I think that's about the wackiest take I can give here. Wackier than some of my actual theories. So assuming nobody is overtly lying, that leaves us with Jax and Kinger. Jax gave us a bogus backstory, and that could just be he's being a jerk. But Kinger's lack of memory of what appears to be anything before his wife abstracted, it presents our mystery with an opening. Not exactly a subtle opening, so yeah, it could be a red herring, but it leaves the obvious question. Is Kinger tied to this more than anyone knows? Especially with him having been there the longest. And 7 years of computer science. The fact nobody knows their real name is an oddly specific thing to forget. Like I said, things that stick out you should jot down and ask why. Why not their entire identity? Why something oddly specific like their name? And to me, I think it's currently only convenient for one reason. By nobody remembering their real name, and the fact we have the company names C and A, of which one is known, perhaps Kinger, with his computer science background and all, is really named Among Us.
Among Us?
Sorry, Abel. Yes, Abel, sorry. I think this has been a running fan theory for a while, and it's set up like an obvious hook, so I kind of feel like it's a red herring, but hey, it's possible. Regardless, I am confident we have more to learn about Kinger and his wife. In his two most lucid moments, he said very specific things about a past he very much regrets. The worst thing you could ever do is make someone feel like they're not wanted or loved. I hated myself. I couldn't help but hate myself for the things I thought I was responsible for. That implies something happened. So shrouded in dark past, no memory, no name, 7 years of computer science. All of these are signs of a horrible backstory waiting to come. And they may connect with the circus. Also, I will note that the office has had some setup and reminder. Obviously, during Pomni's adventure through the exit, she saw the office. Later on, we see Bubble in front of a wall. Notice that outlet on the wall? That sure looks like the office wall. We're just saying. Finally, we have Caine sitting at his desk looking at photos, including a photo of the office. So this is going to come up sooner or later. We're going to see that office again. Who knows how? Actually, while we're here in what feels like an obvious hook, let me break out my bonkers theory I entertained for a bit, just to show you the idea of what happens when you go off the rails. Remember how I mentioned to write down a line when you can't quite pick up what the line meant? When Kinger was first in the dark with Pomni in episode 3, I wrote down fort, because I just didn't remember it. He talked about being in the fort with his wife Queenie before she abstracted. At first I didn't connect what he meant by fort, so on further looking I realize it's his pillow fort, obviously on second look. Now that pillow fort's not very big, is it? Kaufmo turned into this when he abstracted. But Queenie, his wife, only got this big. So, tinfoil hat firmly on my head, I asked what if Queenie was really small, and his fear of insects ties into his protectiveness of her. The line, I used to hate bugs, she somehow got me to like them. Did that mean she was an insect herself? Like her form was a queen bee? Or a monarch butterfly? But then I removed my tinfoil hat, remembered the door evidently showing Queenie, we think, and said, never mind, the size thing of the fort, abstract Queenie and Kaufma was probably just animator leeway to make the script work. Think of this as a lesson on the dangers of pixel peeping to make your theories work. Then again, maybe the supposed Queenie on the door is also animator leeway. Who knows? Okay, back to the circus. So I think the truth behind Caine and Abel is a fair plot point awaiting a reveal. Again, this is a character story, but I could see this adding to it. Like, imagine the characters having to deal with gentle old Kinger being responsible for the circus and having to reconcile that. Or something else terrible. Speaking of the circus, we have another set of people to talk about. The NPCs. Online speculation on the NPCs reached a fever pitch with episode 5 because of a few hints dropped then and one biggie in episode 2. In episode 2, Caine glitches out when he starts thinking about what would happen if he lost track of who's a PC versus an NPC. Episode 5, Pomni looks up and notices an NPC hiding in the background. Again, motivated camera, Pomni's eyes see it, we are supposed to see it. Later on, in episode 5, Caine talks about the problems of AIs running for a prolonged period of time. And at the end of episode 5, we see what looks like an NPC hiding in the circus. I think the primary concern before episode 5 was that one of the characters was a secret NPC, and just like my wild they all worked for the company argument, I don't think any of them being a secret NPC has much supporting, without maybe the what if they're all lying argument. Like, maybe you could chalk up Jax's unwillingness to talk about his past and his line, there's nothing more to me, stop looking, as something more literal. But I just don't see that for anyone. Unless we want to get into some super bleak, only Pomni can escape because the others are never real. And then she'll have to choose between leaving the NPCs behind or her regular life. I don't see that, or I don't see it being set up. But I do see NPCs lurking in the circus or AI issues there as definitely something that's been set up. What I could see from some of the text above is a situation where either Caine sends the NPCs after the circus members out of rage, or Caine's NPCs get out of control without Caine caring, and that imperils the characters. They can't die apparently, but that doesn't remove pain from the equation, now does it? Caine specifically mentioning that AIs running for extended periods of time has problems. My 7 years of computer science suggests you should always look carefully for memory leaks. Or that could be a reference to our magic AI reality now, where chatbots seem to get increasingly unhinged over time, as their extruded vector responses spiral and further off into space. Speaking of an AI going off the rails, I do have one other hook to mention along that line. Gummy Goo absolutely fits the pattern of an NPC that's been set up, reminded, and now we're waiting for the payoff. Episode 2, Gummy Goo accidentally becomes self-aware. Pomni takes Gummy Goo back to the circus. Gummy Goo gets vaporized as an NPC trying to come back. Episode 4, Gummy Goo shows up at Spudsy's, seemingly unaware of his last adventure. But then, at the very end of the meeting, that one last look had people online debating. That isn't an animator's idea. Something like that would come from the writer's notes. So what's the payoff? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe that's just knife twisting from Gooseworks. Or maybe we're waiting for the payoff still. This could be a Westworld situation, where the NPCs start getting flashes of their old runs. Once again, my computer science background says this is why you never read from free memory, but this could come into play. And it has been nicely set up. Like here, speculative fanfic time. All the NPCs are going nuts and they take over. Our heroes are trapped, and Pomni is left imprisoned by Gummy Goo here. Because of the scene at Spudsy's, we're prepared for the knife twisting. But then imagine Pomni pleading with Gummy Goo to remember and help her. We've set this up. We've reminded everyone that he's not supposed to know. Maybe. We are now prepared for an effective and emotional scene. You can see how those seeds earlier can make his story more effective. Sure, he could just pop up and save the day, but now we have added tension. Alright, this video is way too long already. I should wrap it up with the most important part. But before I do, while we're talking about AIs gaining sentience, why haven't I talked about I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream? It's really tempting to try bending and twisting the plot of that Harlan Ellison story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, into the Amazing Digital Circus, and I'm a little reluctant to do that. The biggest reason is I don't know how much the inspiration factors in. because there's actually two very different iterations of the story. The first is a short story, 14 pages long. All humanity is dead except 5 humans who have been tortured for over 100 years by an AM, an AI gone mad. Eventually, how to euphemistically say this? The characters are prevented from exiting themselves, but in a moment of Am's distraction, they realize they can exit each other, and eventually one is left, turned into a slug monster, forced to suffer for all eternity. He has no mouth and he must scream. There's a comic and a radio play that follow the same line as the short story. Besides the one joke at the bar about turning Zooble into a slug creature, the bit where one character has his name changed to Am's amusement, another character being transformed in ways that I can't explain here, and the general story concept, there's not that much to go on, other than reimagining the ending, which is weird because the characters can't die. But there's also the video game, which was adapted with Harlan Ellison's active involvement, so I consider that canon. Harlan Ellison even voices the cantankerous Am, which from all stories is not much of a stretch for him. The video game is a point-and-click adventure, and it goes places. Like content warning for everything in it. It also adds more backstory for each of the characters, much more than the short story could do. If you try, you can squint and kinda place some of the roles of the 5 book characters over the 6 circus characters, but it's not exactly a great fit. And just because Pomni has a changed name like Nimdoc, it's still going to be a big stretch to tie Pomni to Nimdoc's, well, scientific research around the middle of the 20th century. In Germany. If there's any possible inspiration here, in the video game, each of the only 5 characters. Odd. Each of the 5 characters has to go off on their own for a bit to confront their own past. And I think that would certainly be a good way for each of the characters to explore their insecurities and feelings. We've been repeatedly told that they need each other to feel like they matter and to survive. Wouldn't separating them challenge that? Now, the only pragmatic problem is, with 6 characters, that would take a lot of time, and dividing them up all into individuals might be tricky. Maybe they need a few less characters. Just saying. Or maybe we don't need the separation. Standard storytelling says at some point in time, all of this is going to fall apart. We've already got the Jax fault line, the Ragatha fault line, and the Caine fault line established. Gangle's just going to fall apart as soon as there's a conflict. And I speculated on the Kinger fault line with the circus backstory, and I kind of haven't ruled out Zooble either. And then there's Pomni. Well, she might get on the outs if the crew think it's all her fault. She did enter the circus, question the adventures, and was the first one in the show to openly suggest not doing his adventures. She is the inciting incident. I could see the others turning on her as a plot point. A dash of sympathy is in order for Caine here. Caine isn't wrong when he says that their suggestion box adventures cause interpersonal conflict. When they're facing NPCs in Caine's adventures, they clash, but kinda each time in the end they're like sitcom mode, where their relationships more or less stay the same. But in the suggestion box ones, some relationships grow stronger, and some got much worse, because they mostly dealt with one another. The philosopher Sartre once said, "L'enfer, c'est les autres," which translated from grumpy existentialism is, "Hell is other people," from his play Oui, Clos, which is usually translated as, "no exit." Anyway, maybe Ragatha's right at the beginning. Caine's adventures are to keep them occupied, so they're not at each other's throats. Who knows? But with that, whether separate or together, I would expect each character to have to confront and overcome their insecurities. Zooble's body and identity, and what they even want to be, is still up in question. I don't think Zooble knows. Gangle has her depression, and she feels like it's a liability that keeps people away. Ragatha has her insecurity and confronting and facing her own feelings. Where Gangle expresses too much and withdraws, Ragatha bottles it up and chases people, and she's scared of being alone. Jax has his fragility. His tough shell belies someone afraid to show how he feels, get close, and be hurt. Kinger has his past and his wife like we talked about. And Pomni? She did want to go home, but clearly she's also found a family here, and the most hurt she's been here was when she thought she had made a connection with Jax and he pushes her away. I think her temptation could be the exit versus her new family, or that she feels like she doesn't matter. She had a nightmare at the beginning of episode 2 where they couldn't even remember her name. That sort of insecurity might fuel Pomni. On the flip side, the characters could team up like Power Rangers, form a giant mecha, and beat up Caine. But this has been a character story, and I expect it to resolve that way. So, how does it all end? I don't know. No, seriously, how can I know? All of this depends on what Gooseworks wants out of it, or if she wants the audience to suffer. Or maybe she goes J.J. Abrams, throws away all the mystery boxes, and we just have a final boss battle. Ultimately, you can't predict an ending. You can only see after the fact if it ends in a way that satisfies the viewers and the writing that follows it. Any other prediction is just going to be fanfic. I've given ideas above, and they could all be wrong, but I've tried to connect the dots in what would be a satisfying conclusion. I'm kind of like that person dragged into the sporting event who's like, oh, I just hope it's a good game. We've built up a lot of characters and mysteries, and now we get to see if those dominoes fall neatly or not. Endings remind me of something. I remember my English teacher who was now in his dying days. Mr. A, from his deathbed looking up and saying, "Who are you? And what the hell are you doing in that purple costume?" I said, "Don't worry. This isn't real. I'm just paying off the setup and reminder bits about you earlier." He smiled and said, "Ah, excellent. You've learned all I can teach you about the rule of 3. And like a metaphor for this video, he was gone. Or maybe that's a simile. I never can remember. Hey guys, I just wanted to say thank you for sticking around for this video. I'm sure if you've made it this far, it's because you enjoy the Amazing Digital Circus. And I'll be talking a little bit more about the fandom in the next video. Unless this one goes crazy gangbusters, in which case I'll happily talk more about story structure. But I'm assuming that, no one's going to be here for this part of the video. But anyway, please like, comment, and subscribe if you liked what you see. I'll be talking about this, I'll be talking about fandom, and all that wonderful stuff that makes weird people weird. Cheshi out.